Hello, internet friends. Oh, I missed you. Did you miss me? I guess me saying I missed you doesn't make sense because I was still here, but man, I missed sounding right.
We've fallen apart in the first, 15 seconds of this.
I just wanted to get that out of the way. Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Love Hate Relationship, an opinionated podcast for opinionated people. I'm your host, Andy Boel.
And I'm your other host, Alex Ruiz, and we're here to brighten your day, anger your soul, and tell you how to live our lives in that order. And I feel, Andy, that your wonderful wife, Mariah, deserves a shout out and maybe an associate producer credit because she's the only reason that you sound as good as you do right now.
Yes, indeed she does. She is darling and dear and has graciously allowed me to start recording on her laptop because, as we realized last time, I'm going to be dual screening it myself from now on because my old laptop is only now suitable for research purposes. So I will now be recording and editing on this delightful, not 9-year-old laptop.
Well, I am quite excited for you. You've got 2 podcasts to record, and it's important that you've got the equipment.
Absolutely, and we're not big enough for a sponsorship deal yet. Wink, wink.
Wait. Still working on getting Canopy to, hit us up.
Yeah.
Although, by the way, have we talked about your other podcast here
We
yet?
have not formally talked about my other show on this one. No.
Would you like to promo that a touch?
Absolutely.
In our douchebag buffer?
Yeah. Right. So for anyone who isn't in the know, which I was actually looking at the analytics the other day, and statistically is a few of you, I am now doing a film review podcast called Cult Fiction with the lovely and talented Stephanie Johnson, who you will remember from our Robin Williams episode, and you will also remember as Alex's wife.
She has credentials other than being my wife.
Absolutely,
we established that.
She does. That's why I started with the Robin Williams callback. But no, it's a great amount of fun. We watch cult movies and review them, examine them in a modern lens, and figure out why they're problematic, decide whether or not they actually deserve to be fondly remembered as cults. And yeah, it's live now as of recording. It's been out for 2 months, give or take, and we're really excited with the project. So that is Cult Fiction. You can find it on Twitter at Cult Fiction Cast, or, we're doing pretty good at cross-promoting, and LHR is blogging Cult Fiction stuff, and Cult Fiction is retweeting LHR stuff, so you should have seen it by now, but if you didn't, I've got another podcast. Yeah. It's wonderful. Stephanie is delightful and an amazing co-host. I'm very lucky to have the both of you. And
she completely blows me out of the water.
I wasn't going to say it.
Yeah. But I'm trying to think, at time of recording, you guys have done your My Neighbor Totoro episode, your Toxic Avenger episode, which is a delight. I think by the time this comes out, your Life of Brian will have already come out. And I think the day that this drops, I think the next day, you guys have Showgirls.
I think you're right, yeah. So
yeah.
Little primer of the kind of movies we watch. It's randomly selected, so you find out what we're watching next time at the end of each episode, and yeah, it's really just a delight. And I got so excited with this podcast, I went out and started another one, which may or may not have been foolish, but I'm enjoying the process so far. So
yeah. Y'all do good work. It's more niche than this podcast, and I think that's a good thing. And you're kind of a different person on that one, I think. Or at least you fulfill a different role, because it seems like you and Stephanie are, I feel like you and I have a comfortable back and forth of you being a very, Aziraphale-ish, kindly, like dear-hearted person, and I am the crotchety, crowley, I don't know, rage monster,
Monster's good.
curmudgeon. Yeah. Who and but your dynamic with Stephanie is you're both such Hufflepuffs that I mean, the best thing is when you guys have a terrible movie and you're just like, yeah, no, we both hated this movie, and it's like you're such sweet people in general that you get to that point where you watch Toxic Avenger and you just go, there's nothing redeemable about this. I know you've got other movies on the horizon that you've recorded that are even less redeemable than Toxic Avenger somehow, but I'm thinking of one in particular.
Yeah, right.
Which, no spoilers. You guys will have to stream and listen and subscribe to find out. But even if you don't watch the movies, they are fantastic podcasts. I highly recommend them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Get thee behind me, foul fiend. After you.
Yeah, I like blowing your work while we're on this podcast.
Well, we've blown this show so many. I feel like it's only fair we blow my other new show.
Well, it's always funny because like we'll talk about making this podcast on this podcast, and now I'm talking about you guys making another podcast on this podcast.
You know, you joke, but I know for a fact there's at least one podcast about podcasting. It's very Ouroborosian. So we're getting there.
I mean, there's movies about making movies. True. So how many guys in your MFA straight white male writers write novels where the main character is a straight white male novelist trying to write their first novel? Like it's a market. And it's a terrible market, and it shouldn't exist.
Now, that's talk for a hate segment, and you don't have the hate today, so I'm going to have to ask you to stop. But I would love to hear about something you love. For those of you who don't know, here on Love-Hate Relationship, we like to talk about 3 different things every episode. Something one of us loves, something one of us hates, and we take one of your relationship questions and do our damnedest at it. And yeah, so this week it's your love, buddy. What's up?
Yeah, so speaking of straight white dudes, we really need to. I think I need to do a better job of representation when we talk about individual people, but that day will not be today, Andrew Richard. So, my love for today is director, actor, podcaster, filmmaker, writer, comic book writer, jack of numerous trades, the indelible Kevin Smith. So, as per, last time we talked about a filmmaker, I think it was you tossing us Guillermo del Toro. And I thought, okay, I need to talk about not music topics for a minute, because I've been saturating that one. You're welcome to talk about music topics, but I'm going to try and moratorium myself for at least a couple of episodes. So, I thought I'd talk about a filmmaker, Andy. And as per usual, I want to intro this by throwing you a straightforward question. I named a few of the things Kevin Smith has done. I want to ask you, and I have a guess as to where you're going to go with this, but I want to ask you, what do you best know Kevin Smith as?
Yeah, so the short answer is I best know him as a filmmaker, first and foremost. But when I think of Kevin Smith, I got to think about how I first was introduced to Kevin Smith, which I think was like a Comedy Central daytime rerun of the movie Dogma. And that was how I was introduced to Silent Bob, which is Kevin Smith's character in some of his movies and his comedy work at least, and become vaguely aware that there is a filmmaker out there named Kevin Smith, and he's the Jay and Silent Bob guy, and he writes comedies. And then somehow late middle school-ish, I got a subscription to Wizard magazine, which used to be like the It magazine for comic book news and stuff before the internet really took that over. And I remember seeing like a big promo poster that was saying Kevin Smith was going to be writing Daredevil. And thinking to myself, what? That's weird. Okay, whatever. I don't know if I'll be reading that issue of Daredevil. But he wrote Daredevil, and then he started writing Batman, or I think he wrote Batman. He wrote something. Anyway, okay, yeah. He was the funny comedy movie guy who all of a sudden was writing serious, dark, gritty comic books, and that is my that is what I know Kevin Smith as.
Okay, and that is completely legitimate. I actually have that Daredevil book that he wrote sitting on my bookshelf not 10 feet away from me right now. That is his Guardian Devil run, which I believe was illustrated by Joe Quesada, and it's different for a Daredevil comic, but it is very Kevin Smith in that it is super wordy. But it's delightful. No, I appreciate that idea of filmmaker and then comic book writer. That's a lot of how I understood him for a long time. I think that for especially young English-speaking men of a certain age, I think actually around our age bracket, maybe a little bit younger and a little bit older, those Kevin Smith movies, and especially those Kevin Smith movies getting rerun on Comedy Central 900 times, were highly formative. Like, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, which is arguably one of Kevin Smith's, less... I don't even want to call it a stupider movie. It's just one that kind of, in the conversation of his earlier works, gets kind of tossed around as the least artistic, quote unquote, even though there's some really interesting, cool satire there.
It's kind of the most meta, so I would argue its artistic merit is there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's not lacking in artistic merit. It just doesn't get the respect that, say, Chasing Amy or Clerks do. Or even the same kind of cult love that, like, Mallrats gets. But it is still definitely, like, very smart. And for folks who were of a certain age when that movie came out, we quoted that movie nonstop at one another. Like, we quoted that movie like it was The Simpsons to folks just a few years older than us. And for a lot of people, Kevin Smith kind of ends there. He ends as the guy who did the Jay and Silent Bob movies, and nobody thinks about him anymore. And I'm really interested in talking about not just where his film career went after that, but also all of the other stuff that he's done. So thank you for your answer. I'm gonna do a little bit of just early intro info, and then I kind of want to open this up into a discussion of his work. And I mean his work overall. So Kevin Patrick Smith was born on August 2nd, 1970 in Red Bank, New Jersey, to Grace and Donald Smith, a homemaker and a postal worker, respectively. He was the youngest of 3 children, raised in a Catholic suburban household. He talks a lot about being an altar boy as a kid and what his Catholic upbringing did for him. And by his own admission, he says that his upbringing was pretty much marked by church services, 70s comic books and TV, and of course, going to see movies. Following stints at the New School and Vancouver Film School, neither of which he graduated from, he moved back to New Jersey and took his old job back as a convenience store clerk in Leonardo. There, he wrote the script for Clerks, maxed out a dozen credit cards, and sold his prized comic book collection to raise the requisite $25,575 that he needed in order to make the movie. He cast his friends and family, and he shot the whole thing in one 21-day stretch, where he was working at the convenience store during the day and then filming it at night. After successfully getting the movie to Cannes.
I said this absolutely wrong on a recording for Cult Fiction. I believe it is Cannes. I would call it Cannes, but I'm wrong. It's Cannes.
Canes. After successfully getting it to that one movie festival that all of us know, it was picked up by Harvey Weinstein, we'll talk about that more later, and became a critical darling, and then launched a film career for him, which has had mixed success financially, less mixed success, although still mixed success critically, and an extremely dedicated cult following. And so while he's been up and down with directing and writing movies, he suggested he'd retire from directing more than once, and that he'd be leaving the industry, coming back, and now trying to get films off the ground that he just never has been able to. He has also managed to parlay his fame into other ventures. Specifically writing some decent, if wordy, comic book runs, opening a comic book store in Red Bank, which is run by his friends, and had an AMC reality show that was basically a ripoff of Pawn Stars about it, which I watched a few seasons of. It was fun. It was nice. I've watched shittier reality TV show, and or TV shows, and to find out about those, just watch our episode where we talked about Paradise Hotel. Most important to my relationship to his work now, he's a prolific podcaster. He has a podcast network, the Smodco Network, which started off with just his podcast, Smodcast, which is him and his longtime collaborator and producer, Scott Mosier. And also Tell 'em Steve Dave, which was a podcast started by two of his friends. And from those two, there have been, dozens of other podcasts. Some limited, some that have kind of gone defunct, and some that are honestly still going weekly to this day. And I'm really, really... The thing that I love most about Kevin Smith is... the man has, and this is what I kind of wanted to get into, apart from just being so involved in so many mediums, like he is a consummate nerd in a lot of ways. I've always appreciated that he's a fan. And I think that is one of the things that has always come through most explicitly in a lot of his work. If you watch a movie like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and you look at the casting, for instance, he gets Mark friggin' Hamill to put on a goofy-ass costume and play a villain for 2 scenes. Because he was essentially told by the filmmakers, okay, who would you want in this scene? And I guess he had to connect through Nathan Hamill, Mark Hamill's son, in that he was a fan. And so when they approached Mark Hamill about, like, when the producers approached Mark Hamill about doing this, he was like, I don't know anything about this guy. I don't know anything about this movie, anything about this work. And Nathan Hamill was like, do the movie. He's great. He's fantastic. I know you're going to wear a silly costume and all of this, but just do it.
Now, you and your sidekick are finally in the grasp of
That's because he was a fan. Carrie Fisher was in that movie because he's a fan. You know, he did a documentary for Prince that is still in Prince's vault and will probably never be released, but he agreed to do it because he's a fan. When he's on these podcasts and he's talking about he talks about loving, comic books and, but also he talks about loving classics of cinema. He'll reference Jim Jarmusch movies that I've never heard of when he's just talking about filmmaking. But he'll also talk about how much he loved fucking Buckaroo Banzai as a kid and how much of an influence that has been on him. He's this really devoted fan of so many things, and he puts it all into his work, and that has always interested me and drawn me to him in a really definitive way. So yeah, that's kind of my rundown on Kevin Smith. I just wanted to kind of talk about him because I know you're really familiar with a lot of his work, and I don't know how familiar you are with his podcasting or any of his other ventures, but I wanted to kind of just throw a bunch of info at you and then have a conversation.
Totally, and I think there's a hell of a lot to poke at and play with here. I want to lean in on your last point about how he is a fan at heart, and I agree with that. In a way, Kevin Smith kind of lived the dream of so many nerdy ass filmmaker, writer, what have yous to be. Like, he is a Kevin Smith is an absolute success story. And, I say live the dream, but I think a lot of the people who sit there and dream about being the next Kevin Smith probably overlook just how hard he had to work. You mentioned he sold his comic book collection, his prized comic book collection, maxed out credit cards. I'm a filmmaker, and I've rubbed shoulders with the idea of putting all your chips in to chase your dream, and it's scary. It's an uncomfortable notion. It's something that I've backed away from just because it's like, it's hard enough just to get through my day-to-day life, let alone like put everything I have and my family has on the line to try and do a thing. And Kevin Smith did that. Working
Yeah.
days at the convenience store and then shooting nights, that's probably the easiest part of it, but when did the man have time to sleep?
He seriously slept. He slept all of like an hour a night at times, right. Like just taking cat naps where he could.
Right, and that's still the most doable part. And that was, 20 years ago? Which was a different financial landscape, to say the least. So I bring all this up just to commend the guy, and I wonder just how many, like, neck-bearded film studies majors have come out since Kevin Smith made it big and just sit there and think they're going to be the next one when they're not willing to put in the time. I'm looking at his filmography right now. It's not extensive, but it's impressive for like somebody who broke into the industry. And I can sit here and say I've heard of every one of his movies. Even Yoga Hosers, which is this bizarre zombie hockey comedy.
Which was torn apart critically. Right. Yeah. And I like that you point out that there are a lot of people who want... He is this really unique story.
Yeah.
And one of the cool things about how many interviews he's done, how many podcasts he's done, how much he's told this story is the ability to kind of point to all of these little bits and pieces of that story. Like with Clerks, so much has been said about how Clerks came together. Have you ever read the script for Clerks, Andy?
I've not read the script, no.
Okay, I'm going to send you the script. The script is fantastic. I have a PDF of it. But, a lot of it came down to, just in my research. So on Kevin Smith's 21st birthday, he went and saw Richard Linklater's Slacker. Have you ever seen Slacker?
No.
Okay. I honestly don't think it's that great a movie, but he was really inspired by the fact that Richard Linklater, who grew up in Austin, Texas, did an entire movie basically filmed outside on the streets of Austin, Texas. And he was like, oh my God, he just did like a hometown movie. It wasn't a big Hollywood production. It's a very small, very intimate, very talky story, but it doesn't have any giant events. It's very much a movie of people in a very particular small place. And he was like, I wonder if I could do that for New Jersey, for the parts of New Jersey where I grew up, that I love, that I am in love with. He took the idea of from Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. He loved the idea of doing telling the story of an entire life in a one-day story. An entire movie that takes place in one day, all of the events of one day, and it's a different day than any other day, but it's also still kind of just a day. You know, you can see this guy coming to learn, and as you watch and listen to all the different stories of him making those first few films, you see this dude who's just in his early to mid 20s learning the art of filmmaking just from the sake of he tried to do the academic thing, it didn't work, he was a shit student, and he's just kind of learning by doing. He's learning by watching other more established filmmakers and picking up the do's and don'ts and picking up the inspirations. And that's really fascinating to me that he has, because it's not, his movies don't look like anybody else's. No. You could argue Kevin Smith is, if you're gonna believe in auteur theory, see our previous episode about auteur theory and all the problems with that. There's an argument to be made, though, that Kevin Smith might be an auteur, at least in so much as his movies don't look like anybody else's. They don't sound like anybody else's. The movies that Kevin Smith makes that seem the least like him are the movies like Cop Out, which he directed but did not write, and doesn't quite feel good or right. And even he says, like, that's not his best work by this extensive degree.
Yeah, I think the key is, you say nothing sounds like a Kevin Smith movie, and Cop Out was something he directed but he didn't write. Like we talked about our problems with auteur theory back when we discussed it. I don't know if I would call him a film auteur, but I would say he has a wholly unique voice as a writer, and that's the key, which leads us into Out of Movies, which I could talk about for hours with you about, but he's a writer, so that leads us into his comics. I'm assuming but I truly don't. How did he break into writing comics?
So he started off by writing the tie-in comics for Clerks and Chasing Dogma, which was this Jay and Silent Bob comic that kind of tells the story of their adventures between chasing Amy and Dogma. So we started off doing those, and he developed this relationship with a couple of people at the various comic book companies. And honestly, it just came from the fact that, in Clerks, they talk about Star Wars. And in Mallrats, the character of Brody, who's played by Jason Lee, is a huge comic book fan. And they're just like, oh, whoever wrote this movie clearly knows about comic books and loves comic books. And it kind of just ballooned from there. I don't know if you know this, but at one point in the 90s, he was hired to write a script for a Superman movie.
Was that the... Yeah. That was the Nick Cage starring Superman vehicle, if I remember right.
I don't know if his script was specifically attached to the Nick Cage auditions, but it was that process. Okay. It was Warner Brothers trying to figure out, because he was one of several different people who, over the course of this, ultimately it's what would become Superman Returns. But that thing was in development hell for, 20 years. And he was involved with it for a little while, and Nick Cage was at one point attached and did a screen test, and Kevin Smith had a script, which I think if you look around on the internet you can find. There's a few wonderful YouTube discussions of it. Mr. Sunday Movies over at the Weekly Planet, they have a great breakdown of it. I'll link to that YouTube video in the description. It's a long video, but it's worth your time. But basically, he made these connections, and then I think, honestly, I can't remember if his big break was doing Guardian Devil with Joe Quesada, which was basically Marvel wanted to do like a soft reboot of several adult-ish books, and they basically wanted to do these limited Marvel Knights, quote-unquote, storylines with prestige writers. And I know they did Black Panther. I want to say they did Punisher. I think they did a couple others. But one of the big one of this was, hey, Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada are gonna write Daredevil. And that was Guardian Devil. And from there, he got to write Green Arrow for DC. He did a Spider-Man story. I think he did another Daredevil story. He got to do a limited run with Batman. And it's actually kind of funny because with Batman, there was Batman Cacophony and Batman the Widening Gyre, both of which he got his friend Walt Flanagan to illustrate. And there's supposed to be a third one that I don't think has ever come out yet. But that was actually the last kind of Batman publication before the New 52 reboot.
Okay.
Like he's talked about this. But basically, yeah, he made these connections. He made these connections in the industry just being known as the film guy who loves comics. Turn that into writing some comics, and then turn that into writing way, way, way more comics.
Which, again, like, literally, I'm sure millions of American fanboys, like that is the dream.
Okay, write a line. Just right now. Just pitch me a line right now.
Okay. How about that?
That wasn't a line. You just farted.
Is there any more pot?
Yeah. And I know he got to write a story for Batman 1000. He got to write a little 8-page segment of that. Like, he loves comics, sure. And he loves writing them. And
I'm sure you know, but I mean, look at what he named his daughter.
Yeah, his daughter's name is Harley Quinn Smith,
which I cannot give any shit to because I have thought about naming my daughter, if I have one, Harley.
There's actually a really sweet story. His wife, who's Harley's mother, when they were dating, there's some story where she was over at his house and she was like, I want to take a bath. Can I have something to read? Recommend a comic book to me. I'm interested. You're always talking about comic books, and I've never read one, so recommend one. And he was like, let me give her Mad Love. The trade paperback of Mad Love had just come out. So she sat in a bath and read this entire Paul Dini written comic book that's basically an origin story for Harley Quinn. And, after she got out of the bath, she gave it back to him and was like, I really enjoyed that. Harley Quinn would be a great name for a little girl. And they'd been dating less than a year when she said that, but he was just like, oh my God, I can marry this woman. And then they had a daughter, and they named her Harley Quinn. So
well, there you go.
Yeah, it's precious. It's really cute.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't want to close this segment out without talking about just a couple of things.
Well, but I don't want to let you do this and then throw one last log on your fire. So I just want to point out.
Oh, no, please.
The man is one of the most famous hockey fans alive, probably. No, he is, and
that's true. And that's true. He lives in hockey jerseys.
He absolutely does, and gets them custom made, which is something I don't know of anyone else who does. But, I wouldn't pass up an opportunity to bring up my favorite sport for it, but the man is a devout New Jersey Devils fan. Goes with the love of being in Jersey, and yeah, I mean, there was a large segment of his life. I don't know if it's still ongoing, where like he would just wear jerseys and literally nothing else, and I at least respect that. So wanted to point out Kevin Smith, notable hockey fan.
I mean, it is still going. He is still wearing jerseys constantly. He's still photographed in them and everything. He's recently lost a ton of weight.
Right.
He had a heart attack recently, went vegan, and like finally took his health seriously, and he just lost a whole bunch of weight, and he's still wearing, even though he's no longer like anywhere near the size he was, he's still wearing these baggy ass hockey jerseys everywhere. I love that you point that out. There is a podcast on his network. I'm not sure if it's still going on, but it's called Puck Nuts, and it is literally just a hockey podcast.
That sounds like it's worth my time.
Yeah, I don't know how often he's on it. I imagine he'll appear on any of the podcasts that come on his show occasionally, even if he's not one of the hosts. But I know that is a podcast that has been on his network for a while. Yeah. I wanted to point just something out with him. I talked about him being a fan. He also, I don't ever like to put weight behind the notion of just like, these are good celebrities, because you never really actually know anything about the lives of these people. But this is someone who talks a lot, who puts out a lot of just his voice. Whether that's interviews, whether that's his stand-up comedy, whether that's his podcasts. And there's a couple of things that he has done in ways that I really appreciate as someone who tries to be mindful of what kind of celebrities I'm following and boosting up. I mentioned his deal with Harvey Weinstein. The Weinstein Company and Miramax were the ones who started his career off, who kept him going. And after the Weinstein allegations came out, he didn't comment on it at first. He very much was like, I don't know what to do here. Because he spent years talking, a lot like Tarantino, he spent years talking about how important Weinstein was to his career, how much of a mentor he was, how much he did for him as a filmmaker and an artist. Sure. And then when he learned the extent of everything, he publicly acknowledged and apologized for all of the support and everything he had said about him, and kind of had this very public struggle with this person who was so important to me, who I cared so much about, who did a lot for me, did a lot of truly horrible things, and I need to acknowledge that, and I need to, be someone who doesn't just write it off because this is someone who had been good to me. And then beyond that, all of his Weinstein Company movie projects, which I think is everything prior to Red State, which is when he started to do horror movies, which is delightful. His turn as a horror movie director he hasn't made great movies, but he's made interesting
I would
movies,
argue,
sure.
my last tangent, Red State is maybe my favorite Kevin Smith movie. It is excellent. I love it.
Red State is solid. It is, I wouldn't call it his best movie, but I do enjoy it. I have not seen Yoga Hosers. Tusk is
yeah, good word for it.
But anyway, all of the money he makes off of his Weinstein movie, all his residuals, he donates them to a women's charity. He's just like, I don't want this money. And he's not going to stop getting the royalties. Those movies are still making money, but he will not see any money from them. He's choosing to donate them all. He also started a charity called the Wayne Foundation, which helps with victims of sexual slavery. I think it's based out in South Florida.
Okay.
He's he seems to put his best foot forward where he can. He was a vocal proponent of the movement that Neil Adams started to try and get old comic book creators who'd been kind of lost in the shuffle of freelance rights, healthcare, and residuals, and was a big supporter of the campaign to get Bill Finger credited on Batman comics. He tries to throw his weight around, at least from what I have seen and what I have read and the research I have done. He tries to throw his weight behind good causes. And I fucking appreciate that, especially because he's someone who wouldn't probably need to. But he does. And I listen to a lot of his podcasts. I listen to his voice in my ear a couple times a week, honestly. The Fat Man Beyond podcast is fantastic, by the way. But, you know, he defers where he needs to defer. He admits when he admits to having had issues with, you know, old homophobic or less than racially sensitive language. He apologizes for that shit. He tries to do better in his later work. He doesn't stand by how he used to be. And I fucking appreciate that in my artists, in my tastemakers, in my filmmakers, in my writers. I like that I feel like I've watched him evolve over the years, and that has endeared him to me greatly, as he's just kind of tried to be a better person. And he didn't even start off as a bad person, I don't think. He just has gotten better and strived to be better, and I really, really appreciate that.
You know, I want to thank you, man. I think I've always been aware of Kevin Smith, and I mostly overall enjoy his works, but I never really thought of him as somebody that I enjoyed all that much. Yeah, I like his movies. Yeah, he's a huge popular nerd, whatever. But I don't love him like you've made it clear you do, but I definitely like him more after discussing him with you. So, good on you, man.
Yay! Yay! I put some good into the world. Now, do you want to talk about our hate topic, Andy?
Yeah, of course I would. So, like we talk about a love and it's lovely, and then we talk about a hate and it's usually not lovely, but maybe it's at least eye-opening or interesting. And this one is a little different just in how Alex and I talked about it, and I'm gonna recount this with you. You know, I talked with you after we'd recorded our last episode about how I've got my hate in mind. I've had it in mind for weeks. I want to talk about why I hate the Armenian Genocide, and specifically, I hate it because I was unaware it existed until a month ago. And
my response to you when you told me that, was, well, have you ever actually listened to the lyrics of any System of a Down songs?
It's time to make the Turkish government pay for their fucking crime!
Which I have, but I don't remember Sugar referencing genocide, and I'm pulling that one out of my ass. And if there are specific references to the Armenian Genocide in the System of a Down song Sugar, then I've been caught with my pants down.
I mean, admittedly, I need to think about my System of a Down songs in you know, specifically to give you absolute titles of which ones but I know it's a topic that they cover on the regular.
I looked it up after we had discussed, and like they do have a song that is implicitly about the Armenian Genocide. It's not like one of their singles, at least I don't think it is. But anyway, the point is, no, I'm a System of a Down fan, and I was unaware of the Armenian Genocide. And I'm worried about any other people who are worried about it as well. And so let me just give some context as to why I say this. I only discovered about this horrible thing because a war movie podcast I listen to religiously called Friendly Fire. It's absolutely great. I say war movie podcast and people get a certain idea of what that is in our heads. It's three dudes that are just like me and Alex who watch war movies and then talk about them. It's awesome. Anyway, they watched a 2016 film called The Promise, which is about the Armenian Genocide. And two of the three hosts of Friendly Fire were like, yeah, I didn't know this thing existed until watching this movie. And the other one, who is somewhat older, was like, what the hell are you talking about? Yeah, of course there was a genocide about this. So 3 out of 5 podcasters don't know what the Armenian Genocide was, and that's a concerning statistic to me. And I would like to do anything I can to educate about what the event is and talk about why, not even why I think, why clearly it is something that is being swept under the rug of history. So
I'm all in.
Sure. To summarize what Wikipedia has to say, the Armenian Genocide was the systematic execution of 1.5 million Armenians, most of which living within the Ottoman Empire, over the span of 8 years from 1915 to 1923. This included mass deportation and execution of Armenian intellectuals and leaders, the conscription of young men into military service, and finally, literal death marches of the remaining Armenian populace into the Syrian desert. Now, something to make clear. I'm not a fan of any genocides. I historically do not like them or vouch for them. The reason I'm singling out the Armenian Genocide is because of the, at least in my perception, relative obscurity compared to things like the Holocaust or what Pol Pot did in Cambodia or even like the American Trail of Tears, because there's a reason for it. The Turkish government, which, for anyone who needs to know, the Ottoman Empire after World War I turned into Turkey and, a couple of other countries. But the Turkish government, who, are the next line down from the Ottoman Empire, has never formally recognized the genocide. 31 countries in the world have, and bizarrely, 49 of the 50 states have. For reasons I don't understand, Mississippi will not formally recognize the genocide. Maybe they're, holding their cards close to the chest in case Turkey takes over the world. I don't know.
And I, for one, welcome our new insect overlords.
But what's interesting is no standing president has ever formally recognized the Armenian Genocide, including Barack Obama, who spoke out about it when he was still a senator. So when he's a senator, he talks about this thing as a horrible event, and I want to say spoke at like a special Armenian congregation dinner or something, spoke out about it against the senator, becomes president, all of a sudden it doesn't register in his brain, or at least not publicly. And so why do some countries not recognize this event, and why does the president of the United States not recognize this event? Air bases. I didn't find a specific article to link to that references any of this, but they speak about it on Friendly Fire, and I've seen it around in my research. The common logic is that Turkey refuses to acknowledge the genocide and has made it clear that any country that does will not be allowed access to several Turkish air bases and military bases. These specific air bases have been critical to the USA over the past 50 years to be able to properly, bomb the shit out of various Middle Eastern countries and have a strong military presence in that part of the world. So there is a direct through line of our nation's leadership denying the genocide in order to be able to have increased military presence and, bottom line, kill more people. And that is, to use colloquialism, completely fucked, in my opinion.
Sure, colloquialism.
So, I started this, when we talked last by saying, I'm going to talk about the Armenian Genocide. I don't understand how I never knew about this. And you made it clear you absolutely did. So, if you can think on it, and tell me, like when did you become aware of the Armenian Genocide? Was this just a thing that you somehow were taught in schools in our god-awful Florida education system and found out about, or like what?
I was not taught about it in school. Honestly, I mean, part of my kind of political education started with my parents, essentially, just kind of being, my parents are Democrats. I was raised in a house of Democrats. Everyone votes Democratic. They were never like, you must be a Democrat or we will hate you or anything, but like, we always had kind of center-left politics going on. And then somewhere in late high school, I started reading lefter texts, and you start with your Marx and Engels. Eventually, you read the Red Book of Mao Zedong, and you get into the Noam Chomskys and Saul Alinsky's, and it just and that was part of my political education, was just reading a whole lot. And a lot of the more left-leaning political reading I've done would reference the Armenian Genocide. To be clear, I'm not an expert on it. I've never sat down, and I don't think I've ever read an entire book about the Armenian Genocide, for instance. I don't know the details of it. I know that in our education, in our school education, I feel like we're taught, granted, a very specific, not 100% clear about everything leading up to it version of, say, the Holocaust, where it's just kind of presented as World War I happens. After World War I, things are bad in Germany. World War II happens. They start the Holocaust, and that's kind of the narrative presented to us, and that misses a lot of nuances. I'll be honest, that has been roughly my understanding of the Armenian Genocide. Just as this is a thing that happened, here's why it happened, here's kind of the systematic nature of that, here's what the Ottoman Empire was prior to this point, here's what's kind of happened after. And for me, the Armenian Genocide has kind of existed in this same kind of space that, say, Israeli war crimes exist in, where it is a known quantity that certain figures of the left who are, let's say, less beholden to corporate interests than some more center-right entities. I'm talking specifically about, your center-left media outlets. I feel like I'm getting back on my bullshit about the 24-hour news cycle, but like, you're not going to see the Armenian Genocide referenced with any kind of detail on an MSNBC segment, for instance, as you might see on, say, Free Speech TV, with Jeremy Scahill and Amy Goodman talking about it, like proper left journalism and proper left thinkers. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of just learned about it in my education about what global politics are. And part of my criticism of the center and of, the American empire is its lack of acknowledgement of it as a concept or as a historical event.
Totally.
You're right. Air bases are a big factor. Turkey's one of our biggest allies in that region. And, you can I don't want to make this an Israel-Palestine thing, but it's a lot of the same kind of thing. These are our allies in this area: Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. So we look the other way on a lot of things that they do because there are support there, and we have decided they're the ones we ally ourselves with in the pursuit of those we are not allied with.
No,
does that
it
answer
does.
your question? I feel like I've kind of tangented. It
absolutely does. Because I mean, I was
also System of a Down
exactly.
songs.
Because I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's a failing of the system. I don't know if it's a personal failing of my own. You yourself said you had to, very specifically curate what information you were ingesting to become aware of this thing. I did not curate and search out along the same channels, and I just kind of stumbled across this event through a movie podcast. And so I don't know, because I don't want to come across as jingoist, but I've always known who Armenians were. The Kardashians, Eric Bogosian, the guys from System of a Down. It's not like I just didn't understand that Armenia existed or that the Armenian people existed, but I feel like I know most of the other genocides, and not because I seek them out.
Okay, let me ask you this. You and I have played Cards Against Humanity on many an occasion. I don't distinctly remember it. I remember a Cards Against Humanity game, played with some friends. You might have been there. You might not have been. I don't actually remember. But I remember, for anyone who's not aware, Cards Against Humanity is basically like apples to apples, but
and dirty and X-rated. Yeah.
Offensive. Yeah. Not just dirty, but also offensive in a lot of ways. And so I remember one of the cards in Cards Against Humanity specifically referencing the Hutus and the Tutsis. Do you know who the Hutus and the Tutsis are, Andy?
Yes, they are two different African tribes that, and I do get a little sketchy here, either wiped each other out in a war with each other or were systematically wiped out by colonialism.
You're in a good ballpark. Anyone who wants to know about the Hutus and Tutsis, look up the Rwandan Genocide. It's a whole nother genocide altogether. Totally different genocide. And so basically, I'm not going to try and get into all of that, but my point is, I was sitting here and I think I played this card. I don't remember if I played it or someone else played it, and they were like, those are kind of funny words. I don't know what they mean, though. And I'm kind of sitting here just is this the part where I explain the Rwandan genocide to my friends over wine? Or do I just kind of let myself lose this hand and just kind of go, all right, the night continues, You say that you, who slaughtered who? The Hutus or the Tutsis, Andy? Do you know this? I'm not going to be mad at you if you don't.
Hutus killed Tutsis.
Okay, good job. Did you see that Don Cheadle movie about this?
I have not seen Hotel Rwanda, but as soon as you said the words Rwandan genocide, I was like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about now.
There you go. But that gives you an idea. Your context for Armenians were the Kardashians. Your context for the Rwandan genocide is, as soon as I say Rwanda genocide, you think Hotel Rwanda. A movie which I saw on TV once, I think most of it, and just kind of went, oh, that was pretty good. But that's not my source of education for the Rwandan genocide.
Sure.
And the people we were with, all of them, actually, I'm trying to remember the group that we were with, but I know all of them at least had bachelor's, and I think several of us had master's degrees. And as far as I could tell, I think I was the only one in that space who knew the context for the Rwandan genocide. I don't say that to be shitty and be like, nobody cares about anything important or anything like that. I don't blame anyone who doesn't know those details on their own front. I blame the fact that we don't fucking teach this shit. We don't educate the shit. It doesn't get talked about in media. And you have to chase down this information.
Absolutely.
Because if you're fed that state line, then you're probably thinking in terms of, oh, the president isn't acknowledging this, so I guess it probably didn't happen, or it's not worth looking into.
No, I completely agree, and that leads into kind of my final talking point. I want to talk, so yes, part of it absolutely is a lack of proper education systematically, and it's like a past tense problem, and it's this kind of nebulous thing to sit here and hate how we're not properly taught about war crimes in schools. But I want to close out by letting everyone be aware that there is a palpable thing that I can sit here and say I hate and point at. And the best way to do that is to talk about this movie, The Promise, which is how I became aware of the Armenian Genocide in the first place. The Promise stars Christian Bale, Charlotte LeBon, and Oscar Isaac. It came out in 2016. It had all of the makings to be like an Oscar bait historical epic, and at least from the review I listened to about it on a podcast, it's a pretty good movie. Now, if you go on IMDb, The Promise has a 6 on IMDb. Now, say what you will about, like, systematic rating scales as a whole and the validity of them, but generally most people would go, oh, that got a 6? Oh, that must be a massive piece of shit. I'm not going to see that. The Promise has a 6 on IMDb because there are dozens and dozens and dozens of 1- and 2-star reviews citing its historical inaccuracy, and it has been proven that 95% of these reviews have come out of Turkey. So the thought is the Turkish government refuses to acknowledge this event so much that they blackballed a movie that was made about it because they don't want negative press. Beyond that, it is very important to bring up a man named Kirk Kerkorian, who was a former owner of MGM Studios and produced the movie. He gave $100 million of his own movie to ensure that The Promise was produced, and he died before he could see the movie be fully made, but it was kind of his last fuck you to Turkey. Kirk Kerkorian is an Armenian American. His parents moved out of Armenia, I want to say in 1915 is what I read, so right as all of this started happening. I think they just happened to get out. But this man was a owner of MGM and was trying to make this movie since the 70s. He originally wanted Charlton Heston to be the lead.
You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell!
Right? And for 40 years, he was told, no, you can't make this movie. You can't make this movie. We need the military bases. No, the Turkish government says if we make this movie, we, an American movie company, they will take it as a personal affront and we will lose our military bases. He finally, like, I should have looked this up. I want to say he had cancer, and that might be completely inaccurate, but the point is, on his deathbed, more or less, he just finally says, no, we're making the movie. Here's $100 million. Tell this story. This story needs to be told to the people so they remember. We're not teaching it in history classes, so let's make a movie and cast these A-list actors and, make a good movie. And it gets completely blackballed by the Turkish government to the point of obscurity. You want to?
It's funny. I just pulled it up on Metacritic, which is the movie rater that I believe is the best, because Rotten Tomatoes is tripped up with its one up and down. IMDb is always tricky with the user scores. The thing I like about Metacritic is that it amalgamates critic reviews and user reviews. And I mean, so on Metacritic, the critic review is an average of 49 out of 100. And it's interesting because it's a whole lot of like medium reviews, a few negative reviews, and several positive reviews. But the positive reviews come from RogerEbert.com, Glenn Kenny, who's a great reviewer. Richard Roper gave this a 4 out of 5. Like, whoa, that's big. The Globe. There's some solid reviews here from some people I really respect, but the user scores, there are 108 positive reviews from just Metacritic fans writing in,
right?
And like a third of that are mixed or negative. It is definitely, this looks skewed to me in a really weird way.
Absolutely, and I probably should have found a article that is concrete evidence of this. Anybody who's further interested, listen to the Friendly Fire episode about The Promise, and they do speak on this and just the whole thing a little more than we have. I want to wrap up and get into our question, but you want a tangible thing for me to point at and hate? What the fuck, Turkey?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, there's a lot we can say at this point about, it's a stupid meme at this point to talk about things like fake news, for instance, or post-truth rhetoric, which is some of that like dumbass Jordan Peterson nonsense. But there is, honestly, if there's any place here where I just want to have a little hope, it's in the people doing the work to try and get that information out there.
Yeah.
It makes total sense for power structure to A, deny its past, and B, insist on a narrative, an almost Orwellian narrative, to paint its past in a different way, to deny certain things in order to keep its power. This gets fought with education and with contextualization and with not getting bogged down in what the state is feeding you. There's a reason why journalism is, this is just me getting back on the journalism bullshit, but the reason why good journalism is so important is because it's the only thing that can actually that can speak truth to power the way that you need.
Totally.
Turkey gets away with it.
Absolutely, man.
And they get yeah.
Here's my final thing. I found the article I should have found before this. We're going to link it. It's a Washington Post article from April 19th, 2017. And here's all you need to hear is the first paragraph. The Promise doesn't officially open in theaters until Friday. But on IMDb, a website where people can rate movies, the film has received more than 120,000 ratings, half of which are 1-star reviews. This is how they got caught. They reviewed the movie before it even came out so that people wouldn't see it. And the article goes on to list specifically how this was like a internet troll group on a Turkish message board, like propagating, hey, let's sink this movie. And then the government got behind it and like continued to allow this movie to be, canned. This is a really bizarre example of just controlling information and controlling a narrative, which is, something most of the terrible fascistic empires of human history have done. So if you're interested, find The Promise or listen to the Friendly Fire review or read this article and do your own education, do your own research, and keep your eyes out, I guess. Like, I stumbled upon, just like, okay, so I've told you about this one thing. What, we talked about the Hutus and the Tutsis. What other atrocities out there are widely becoming forgotten in the mind's eye of the public. I don't know. I hope people can be vigilant and not let these awful things fade into history.
And on that
note, a question. Yes.
Okay. Andy, should I read this one or do you want to?
You read the last one, mostly for audio purposes.
Okay. You go for it.
Hi, A&A. I've got a pet question for you. Yay! I recently graduated college and, like basically everyone, moved back to my parents' house while I work on getting the next part of my life figured out.
Whoop, whoop.
Here's my issue. My parents got a dog last semester, and he and I aren't getting along. He sort of parked in my old bedroom while I was away, and now that I'm back is really territorial. He growls at me a lot, has peed in my room once, and is generally aggressive. He's really sweet with my parents, though. While I try to walk him or feed him, he doesn't listen, or barks, or drags me along, but is all nicey nice with them. I came to them about him when he peed in my room, and they sort of said leave it alone and let them know if it happens again. I don't want to rock the boat, especially since they're letting me stay with them, but this is really affecting me. And this was not given any name.
Nope. So, how should we address this individual, Andrew?
So, Alex, you know this used to be kind of a joke about, like, person goes off to college, mom and dad rents out their room to, like, the milkman or somebody comedic or distasteful in some way. I'm trying to think if there's a specific famous example of you rented out my room, that guy. Either that or I'm trying to remember the main character of Cujo.
I mean, if you want to go with Cujo, I ain't gonna be mad about that. I fucking love Cujo.
Well, then, Cujo it is.
Cujo! Oh my god, you rabbit.
And just for reference, Cujo is what we're calling our listener.
Right, which doesn't actually make sense because Cujo was the dog.
And I'm looking it up right here, and it looks like the people stuck in the car during Cujo, their character names were Donna and Tad. So here's my plan. Cujo is our listener. The dog's name is Tad, and I'm referring to both of your parents as Donna.
Works perfectly.
Okay, and that wasn't at all confusing. So, Andy, any initial thoughts for Cujo, being that you are the one of us who has actually had a pet before?
Sure, and this is... I mean, I really am reminded of, like, mom and dad rent out their son's room and then like the new roommate more than their son. Like, this is really bizarre to me from your parents' perspective of, oh, well, we like the new dog, just, like, it's gonna be fine, just, like, don't bother him. I love pets, and I'm not a parent. I don't know if I would side with my pet over my child. But that doesn't really help you for me to say that your parents are being kind of weird about this. So the easiest thing, but this is like contextual, is if you have another bedroom, maybe your room is Tad's room now. And, you know, you say that you know, you're just trying to figure out the next step and you're getting back on your feet. Maybe you shack up for, you know, 4 to 8 months, however long it is, in the guest bedroom, and that's your space now. And other than that, you know, you do your thing and the dog does its own thing, and you just try to live your lives separate from each other.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, were you done?
No, yeah, you go ahead and I'll cue up the next bit of advice.
No, yeah, that's real helpful, you Midwestern little... Okay. So Cujo, I think Annie's got. That's definitely an avenue. If you have another bedroom available and you can kind of separate that out, part of me kind of wonders if few things, and I think my response to you is tethered a little bit to context. Um, I didn't move out of my parents' house when I went to college. I stayed in my parents' house, and I stayed in my parents' house for a few years after college. It just kind of fell out that way. And it was the best thing for me at the time, but it was kind of a different situation. You say you make it sound like you moved to your parents' house for lack of knowing what else you were going to do. And that's cool. It's cool that your parents are willing to help you out there. I like your joke about how, like, basically everyone you had to move back to your parents' house. Which, I mean, real talk, yo. That said, if this really is a temporary adjustment, if you're planning to just be at your parents' house until you find a decent job and can move out ASAP, this might be kind of a suck it up and just deal with it for a couple of months and just put your energy into finding that gig and doing that. If that's what you're looking at. I imagine there's a very real possibility that that's not the case and that you are possibly going to be here for a year or longer even. Certainly a lot of people are. A lot of people in your situation, fresh college graduates. Congratulations on graduating college, by the way.
Yeah, congrats.
Yeah. But if this is a long-term situation, I think you need to talk to your parents before anything else. You say that you went to them about this, peeing in your room situation. It sounds like your parents don't want to take a side on this. A lot of parents, when their kids are in college, especially if you move out during college, a lot of them will get a pet because, they want something to nurture. They want something else to help take up some of their time. That's completely normal and valid. And if they have a good relationship with the dog, awesome. But this is affecting your material life. And if you're going to be here longer than, a few weeks or months, you need an actual solution. First and foremost is probably talking to your parents. Secondly is developing some kind of strategy. How do you get a territorial dog more on your side? Bribery, Andy?
No, dominance. I mean, you make it clear to the dog that you are the alpha. You can, if the dog pees in your room again, you can, stick his face in it. That is one of the more archaic but effective ways to get a dog to stop peeing in the house. The breed and age definitely matter. I can't think of a dog breed off the top of my head that doesn't deal well with like college age people, but there are dog breeds that are specifically not great with children and can, cause conflict in that way. And it sounds like, I mean, if this is a young dog, you can bend its spirit a bit. If it's an older dog, that's definitely going to be harder. Without any more context, I wonder about how much can be done about the dog. Especially, I mean, I don't know what displays of dominance you can do that aren't going to be perceived as you bullying your parents' dog in their eyes. If sucking it up isn't an option, then I do agree with Alex that you need to talk to your parents. Because it's really not sitting well with me that they're not taking a side. It's a dog. And I love dogs. But it's a dog. You're their child. Trying to... Like, I like what Alex had to say. I wonder if you can mount that argument towards your parents in a calm way. because I'm worried about you ticking them off. But yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say if he pees in your room again, like, don't get yourself bit or anything, but try to make it clear to the dog that is not okay. And at the same time, work with your parents. I mean, my final thoughts, I've never owned a dog that was mean to me. My dad's dog was scared of me, and he's since chilled out. I can remember a neighbor's dog as I was a boy that absolutely hated my guts, and it was a Scottish Terrier, and it would like jump in my face and snap and bark at me. And that Scottish Terrier never chilled out with me. It never got better. So it is entirely possible that the dog is not going to change its behavior. But your parents can, and your parents should, honestly. So I would work on that part of the equation, and if you don't feel comfortable like doing that, then figure out a way you're going to show this dog who's boss, and good luck to you, Cujo.
Yeah. I'm going to be honest with you, Andy. I don't feel comfortable endorsing putting a dog's face in its own piss. Maybe I'm a giant softie, so I won't personally endorse that. You take Andy at his word. He has owned a dog before. I am going to say, just in practical terms, until there's a change, you keep the dog out of your room, first and foremost. Close your door. If the dog scratches at the door and your parents are like, let the dog in your room because, he's scratching at the door, just be like, no, I'll fix the fucking door, whatever. I'm not going to let the dog in my room and piss on my stuff, period. That's a stand that should be worth taking. And if your parents have an issue with you keeping your door closed so that the dog doesn't piss in your room, you have the grounds for a deeper conversation. First and foremost, just guard your shit, guard your life. I know it looks like you want to help out with the dog. You say you try and walk it and feed it. Maybe apart from getting it away from your stuff, just try and build a little rapport with it. I floated this question by Stephanie, who has owned several dogs, and she suggested stuff like, when your parents, who the dog is super sweet with, are walking the dog, go with them and try and just let the dog see that your parents are cool with you, so that maybe that'll communicate some kind of signal. Finding displays of dominance sounds like a smart, reasonable call. Definitely do something along that vein. What you can't do is let your fear of, upsetting your parents cause you some misery. You need to take practical steps to protect your well-being and your stuff, and then see what you can do about the dog. And try and get out of there as fast as you can, frankly. Like, that's just in general. Moving back after college can be kind of hard on the self-esteem, I imagine. And getting yourself out of this situation, even if things end up being good with the dog, will probably do other good things. But yeah, talk to your parents and try and get them on board to at least agree to some kind of practical situation, because ignoring it doesn't seem to be helping. So do something, and even if that something doesn't work, come up with another thing. This could be a problem that could bring you and your parents a little closer and maybe ease whatever tensions or guilts or worries or problems you're having or they're having with the situation. It sounds like a tense situation, probably for reasons other than the dog. So use it as an opportunity for that. Try different things, see what works, and try and get them on board with something practical. It can just start with keeping him out of your room. If you can get your parents to agree to let them keep him out of your room, or for them to keep him out of your room and be okay with you doing that, that is a practical first step. After a week of that, go for the next step, and so on. Do it slow. Is that reasonable?
That's very
Andy?
reasonable, especially for a admitted non-dog owner. I think you did a really good job there, bud.
I will give all credit to my previously dog-owning wife. And I accept none of it. So. All right. That's our show.
If you have a relationship question, be it with a pet or a loved one or a classmate or really anything that you can have a relationship with, you can send those questions into us and get our perfectly unqualified advice. And you can send those questions to lovehaterelationshippodcast@gmail.com, where we promise we'll read them.
Yep. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or even TuneIn Radio. Hey, Mom. We would also love it, absolutely love it, if you reviewed us on any or even all of those. You can tweet us at LHRPod. That's LHRPOD with your questions, and follow us there to keep up with new episodes.
If you want to follow me personally, I'm Andy Boel. I'm JovoCop2113 on Twitter. And you can now follow my other show, Cult Fiction, at Cult Fiction Cast, also on Twitter.
Yeah. You can follow me on both Twitter and Instagram at _X_RUIZ. Thanks for listening, y'all. We appreciate everything. Andy's audio is
very
back,
happy.
baby. Tell your enemies.